Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room. I'm ABC's Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us today, facing a wave of criticism that he's a racist, both from Democrats, members of his own party, former aides, even the husband of a top White House advisor. President Trump today was defiant, declaring he's not a racist and doubling down on his attacks on those 4 Democratic congresswomen he says should go back to where they came from.
Mr. President, when you say that the Democratic congresswomen should leave if they're not happy, where should they go?
It's up to them. Go wherever they want, where they can stay.
And our Karen Travers, White House correspondent, was in the room with President Trump at that cabinet meeting. She asked members of the cabinet whether anyone in the room was uncomfortable by what she heard, what they heard from President Trump, and none of them would say as much. But Republicans on the Hill a short time ago rallying around the president. Republican leader Mitch McConnell says he doesn't think the president's a racist and said others are to blame. Here's Mitch McConnell.
The president's not a racist. And I think the tone of all of this is not good for the country. But it's coming from all different ideological points of view. That's the point. To single out any segment of this, I think, is a mistake. There've been this kind of rhetoric from a whole lot of different sources all across the ideological spectrum in our country.
A lot of other people to blame, Mitch McConnell said in this race debate up on Capitol Hill that did not sit well with a number of the women at the center of this firestorm. Our Sarena Marshall up on Capitol Hill caught up with Alexandria Cortez of New York, and she wasn't happy.
When you tell American citizens to go back to their country, especially when we are sworn citizens and are duly elected by fellow American citizens in the United States, that has everything to do with race, because they have targeted 4 congresswomen of color who are American citizens with a classic line of white supremacy, and they are trying to pivot and they're trying to excuse it, and frankly, the majority leader is complicit in advancing racism in America if he doesn't even have the backbone to speak out against the most basic line. Honestly, if these members go on the record condoning the president telling women of color to go back to their own country, I invite them to, because we will win the 2020 election and we will take this country back, because we believe in fighting for every American.
All right, a defiant Alexandria Cortez. Want to bring in Sarena Marshall now. She's still up on Capitol Hill. She was working the halls of Congress today. Sarena, members of the House are preparing to vote tonight on a resolution condemning President Trump, defending those 4 women. Tell us about the resolution, and are any Republicans going to support this thing?
Yeah, Devin, that resolution was introduced by a Democratic member of Congress, and they are planning to condemn the president's remarks. But to your question, are any Republicans going to support it? That's a big question mark. ABC News reached out to every single congressional Republican office, and only 42 of them actually spoke out against the president's comments. But that doesn't mean they're going to vote against the president's comments on that condemnation resolution. In fact, it'll be a question of if any of them do, since the Republicans on Capitol Hill, the minority whip, Steve Scalise, is actually encouraging Republicans not to vote for the resolution. And you heard Mitch McConnell right there. He didn't condemn those remarks either. In fact, blaming everyone for the president's comments and saying both sides have a lot to blame. But really, this is going to come back to politics. The president wants to make this a fight between him and the progressives on the left side of the Democratic caucus versus those centralists. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to lump those 4 women as part of the extreme part of the party and say, because the Democrats have rallied around those women against the president's remarks, that's what he's going to go up against in 2020.
Yeah, everyone has gone back into their political corners over this one. Sarena Marshall, thank you so much for your reporting and chasing down Alexandria Cortez. Want to bring in now a Democratic member of the House, the only Congresswoman of color running for president in 2020. Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii joins us now from Capitol Hill. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. Want to get your reaction to this resolution and what you hope this vote tonight will accomplish.
Well, first of all, I just want to be really clear about the devastating consequences of President Trump's racist comments. First of all, stoking these racist feelings and stoking religious bigotry in this country, tearing apart an already divided country for his own political gain, is beneath the office of the presidency and undermines the very values and principles of our democracy. Second, his using the platform of the presidency essentially to tell people who are critical of him or complaining about things or this or that they should, quote unquote, go home, threatens our First Amendment rights, our freedom of speech. You know, when we think about who we are as Americans, what is it that makes us Americans? What is it that makes our country? It is those values and principles enshrined in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence that says all men are created equal, you know, endowed with these inalienable rights by our Creator, every single one of us. And so that's the statement that I think that this resolution is seeking to make, to remind the country, to remind this president about who we are as Americans and that we will not stand for racism or bigotry or seeking to anyone who seeks to squash free speech.
And Republicans have been quite critical of the resolution, perhaps unsurprisingly, a number of them saying that this is selective outrage by Democrats. One Trump campaign advisor told me earlier that there wasn't a vote of condemnation against Ilhan Omar when she said anti-Semitic things that were backed up by David Duke. What do you say to that Congress is getting into the practice now of condemning some people by vote and not others when it comes to their behavior and their language?
We're talking about the President of the United States of America, the person in this country who has been charged with this incredible responsibility to be the President and Commander-in-Chief to serve and keep safe Americans all across this country, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, political party, ideology, agree, disagree. The President of the United States needs to be a leader who is uniting our country, who is bringing people together, who's able to disagree without being disagreeable, keeping at the forefront that vision that our founders had for this country, a government truly of, by, and for the people. Now, President Trump has done the exact opposite of that. The values and the statements that he is pushing forward, the sentiments that he is stoking are anti-American. They go against these very true American values.
Do you think that those sentiments and those values that the president is pushing change your calculus on impeachment? Those 4 Democratic women last night at a press conference said that all of this emboldens their argument that an impeachment proceeding needs to be opened. Do you agree with them on that?
I don't. I think that would only further divide a terribly divided country. It further emboldens me in my conviction about why I'm running for president, because I believe that we need to defeat Donald Trump in 2020, and the voters of this country need to make that decisive statement that we will stand for all Americans, we will stand for our freedoms, we will stand for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, freedom of the press, and we will defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020.
Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat of Hawaii, the only Congresswoman of color running for office on this vote tonight. Thank you so much for joining us from Capitol Hill, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
And those president's comments reverberating across the country, including in America's major diverse cities. We caught up a short time ago with the mayor of Chicago, the 3rd largest city in the United States. Mayor Lori Lightfoot is the city's first black mayor, also the first openly gay mayor, and we asked her to respond about how the president's comments are reverberating there.
Well, it's really unfortunate, and it shows a level of ignorance that the president has exhibited on other occasions. I think that the response has been appropriate. Obviously, these are women who are congresspeople. They're here in the United States, native-born, all 3 of the 4, and the other is someone who came over as a refugee. But I think it speaks to a pattern that the president has shown of really belittling women in general, but particularly women of color. And I'm glad that there has been a significant pushback, as well there should be.
And what more should Democrats do to respond to this, in your view? I mean, it does seem that the president, at least politically, wants to be having this debate. He sees some sort of advantage in having this issue of race front and center.
Well, look, I think that the president, unfortunately, has done a lot of things in the course of his presidency that are aimed at dividing us. I think the things that we have to focus on as leaders, and particularly as Democrats, is making sure that we're speaking to the values of who we are, and we're talking to the issues that really are important to everyday citizens. Issues about income insecurity, about making sure that people have great access to affordable health care. And in my city, I'm spending a lot of time making sure that I'm providing hope and optimism and support to immigrant communities all over the city of Chicago.
You wrote an open letter to the president yesterday. It was published in the Washington Post about his threatened mass ICE deportation raids. Those didn't seem to materialize in Chicago. What do you make of what this episode was all about?
Well, look, whether they materialize or they don't, the damage has been done. I have people in my city, particularly young people, who are worried every day that they leave their house. Whether or not they're going to come back and see their parent, their grandparents, people in their home. So the has done a lot of damage. It's traumatized people. But the one good thing that's come out of this is that our city is united. We are standing shoulder to shoulder with our brothers and sisters in the immigrant and refugee community, and people are at a heightened sense of awareness of what their rights are.
And you've ordered the police department there to cut off access to ICE from the databases, to stop cooperating with ICE. Have you seen an impact on cooperation between immigrant communities and the police? Is there a real fear there that that's going to be diminished?
Well, I think that what we've been trying to do all along is make sure that we build better relationships between the police and the communities they serve. I think the immediate impact of shutting ICE out from our databases, not allowing our police department to participate in any of the immigration raids, is it's limited ICE's reach. The reality is the numbers of ICE agents in the homeland is actually fairly limited, and they rely upon local police departments to help extend their reach. We're cutting that off, and we're saying we stand with our immigrant neighbors, our friends, our family members.
And any concern, though, that that could sort of be considered coddling of criminals or helping some of these more dangerous undocumented immigrants evade justice?
No, because if you look at the people that the president has talked about, these are people who came here in search of a better life. They were fleeing poverty, they were fleeing oppressive governments, and they were fleeing violence. And the immigrants and refugees in the city of Chicago, just as it is all across the country, contributed mightily to the quality of life in our neighborhoods, the stability of our neighborhoods, and to our local economy. These are not criminals. They are people who are contributing in a significant way to our city.
I want to ask you very quickly, but a couple of questions about the 2020 Democratic primary underway. First, wanted to get your take on Mayor Pete Buttigieg, your fellow mayor there to the south. What do you make of his candidacy so far? And I know he struggled to attract support from African-American voters. What would you advise his campaign to do to help counter that and improve that?
Well, look, I've met Mayor Pete. I appreciate everything that he's doing and saying. He's obviously caught fire. I don't need to give him advice, but look, I think anybody who's running to be the president of the United States has to have a specific urban plan. The cities are where things are happening. Mayors all over this country are doing amazing things to tackle tough challenges that people face, and we have the ability to impact people's lives more than any other elected official, up or down the ballot, if you will. So listening to what's happening in the cities, making sure that we're meeting the needs of people in our diverse communities, that's really an important thing, and I hope that the Democratic aspirants to the nomination really focus on having an urban redevelopment and renewal plan, because that's what's going to move the country forward.
And what do you make of this dispute between polling frontrunner Joe Biden and Kamala Harris of California over busing and the former vice president's comments about segregationists? Where do you fall on that, people trying to make sense of that debate?
Well, look, I think both of these are really strong candidates. And, you know, obviously Biden's been in office for a long time. He's got a significant body of work as a representative. Kamala Harris comes and offers, I think, a very fresh and personal perspective on challenging issues of race, which she's not afraid to talk about. And I think it's that frankness and the candor that ultimately is going to win the day. And many of the Democratic nominees are doing that. They're speaking to the needs of people.
You think her critique of Joe Biden is fair?
Look, I'm not going to get into whether it's fair or isn't, but obviously we now know from the polling that it resonated with a lot of people who are watching and paying attention. And these are the busing saga in American history, particularly as it played out in a lot of cities, is one of controversy still, and it's something that has to be reckoned with.
Our thanks again to Mayor Lightfoot. Democrats not the only ones watching that debate. The president's campaign also following Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. A short time ago, we had Trump campaign spokesman Mark Lauder here in the briefing room to ask him about that busing debate and more. Take a look. Now, I wonder where the president falls on all this. Does he support federally mandated busing? Would he wade into this debate?
Well, when it gets into the policy decisions itself, specifically, those go through the White House, since all the policy decisions are made, at the White House as the president. But I can tell you what the president does support is making sure that all students have access to choice and the best schools possible. That's why you see the president really leaning in on providing quality options for students, and especially those at the lower economic strata.
Are Joe Biden and Kamala Harris your two biggest competitors right now?
I think from the campaign standpoint, we actually don't look at any of the Democrats as being any different from each other. They're having to endorse such radical ideas, such as the Green New Deal and other radical positions, just to get through this primary, that whenever they do come through the primary, we know a few things are going to be sure. One, they're going to be broke because they'll have spent all their money going through the primary. Two, they will be broken and bruised from going through that primary. And then they will have endorsed many of those policies that are just so out of touch.
I want to shift gears to the focus of the president's messaging in the last couple of days. Obviously, a lot of talk about the racist tweets that the president sent out. He's been defending those tweets. You've got white supremacy groups embracing this, celebrating the comments as being exactly what they wanted. You've got Anthony Scaramucci saying this is racist. You've got Kellyanne Conway's husband, a Republican lawyer, saying this is racist to the core. And that doesn't seem to bother the campaign at all.
Well, as the president has said, he is not racist. He's calling out the policy differences that he believes with these radical members. And when it comes to white supremacists, I'll tell you that when they were celebrating some of the things that one of the members of the squad were saying, I didn't see anybody actually out there talking about how David Duke was praising and endorsing the anti-Semitism that was being shown by one of those members. So again, it's picking and choosing here what we're choosing to be outraged by.
I want to ask you about something the president said to our very own Barbara Walters during the last campaign when you were working with him. Let's take a listen. This is from 2015.
What words would you use to describe Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, I'll give you the positive. I've always had great imagination. I've had great success with money. But what they say is he a nice person? And I think actually I am a nice person, but I think the thing that will surprise people, I'll be a unifier. I think I'll bring people together. And that includes blacks and whites and everything. I think people will come together.
Can you say he's fulfilled that promise?
I think you can. When you look at some of the results, when you look at the results that we have, we see African American unemployment at a historic low, women unemployment at a 65-year low, lowest unemployment in history for Latino Americans. He's delivering on the promises.
There's also a number of unfinished business items from his first campaign. The wall is still under construction and underway. You have the trade deals. USMCA hasn't gone through Congress yet. You have the starts of some green shoots with North Korea, but obviously a lot of work to be done there. The president said during his Republican convention acceptance speech that I alone can fix this. A lot of people remember that. Did he overpromise? Is there any danger there to voters as you head into the next phase of this campaign, looking back on that and going, well, wait a second? He said he could fix it, but we've got some of these big items, big ticket items from his campaign that he hasn't completed yet.
Well, and I think it's actually going to provide a platform for him to be able to say why he needs to be reelected, so you can continue to work on that job. You know, changing Washington D.C., the culture of Washington D.C., or even having a lot of these projects. It takes a while to do things in government.
Thanks again to Mark Lauder. A lot to follow as this campaign heats up. But despite the debate over the president's tweets and racism, the White House is pushing ahead on their top economic priorities. Today, National Economic Council Director Larry Kudlow convened a summit, really, of 9 different state leaders to talk about the opioid crisis, jobs, infrastructure. Larry Kudlow came by the briefing room to tell us the state of the economy. Take a look. Mr. Kudlow, thanks so much for joining us. You've got a summit today with local leaders from 9 states. Certainly a lot of good economic news to celebrate. Low unemployment, 200,000 jobs created last month. What's the biggest threat to the economy right now as you see it?
Well, look, by the way, we had more good news this morning. Big number in retail sales, manufacturing, and very low inflation on import prices. So I will repeat, we are in a long, durable prosperity cycle with tremendous job creation and low unemployment across the board, every category.
You say it's a durable growth right now. The Fed chief just last week said he has some concerns about the impact of the trade war, about the slowing of the global economy. Are you confident that that trade war isn't going to get us off course in the next few months?
Well, look, we are negotiating with China. We're back at the table. I think that's a good thing. It's not coming easily, but there are constructive talks going on.
You said last week that you think that it's possible we may never reach a deal with China.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to predict one way or the other. We may get a deal, we may not get a deal. The president has said several times he's quite comfortable where we are. Our economy is booming. Their economy is slumping very badly. So we'll see how this plays out.
A colleague of yours, an ally of the White House, Peter Thiel, founder of PayPal, billionaire investor, said this morning that he thinks that China has been working closely with Google. Google needs to be investigated for treason, he says. The president apparently supports that. Do you think that Google has acted in a treasonous way with its partnership with the Chinese?
I am unaware of any facts on that. Now, Peter Thiel is a good man. He's a brilliant guy, great entrepreneur. He's a strong supporter of the administration, great help to us. But I also keep in touch with Google, and the president of Google comes around frequently to talk. I am unaware of any of these charges. And in fact, Google themselves have denied it. Google, by the way, is not operating in China presently. And I think it would be very difficult for them, at least they think it would be difficult for them. I don't think they're in cahoots with the Chinese military. But look, Peter Thiel, we will look into the matter. The president said that, I think, this morning. We will have a look at this thing and see whether we can clarify it. But at this point in time, I must say, my friend Peter Thiel, I'm a little bit skeptical.
I want to ask you real quickly about those debt ceiling negotiations underway up on Capitol Hill. For the average folks out there, the debt ceiling is like the nation's credit card. You got to raise it to keep paying the bills. How damaging do you think it would be to the U.S. economy, Director Kudlow, if a deal isn't reached, if we were to default in some way?
Well, the one thing we do not want to do, as Secretary Mnuchin has said time and again, and I concur, we do not want to go into default on our debt. Right? Our currency, the U.S. dollar, is the strongest, most dominant currency. It is the international currency. It is international global money. We don't want to wreck that. That would do great damage to our economy. Capital would leave the U.S. And we would find ourselves probably in a pretty bad slump. So let's not tempt fate. Now, as far as
confident a deal can be reached in the next couple of weeks?
I think so. I mean, I've talked to the Secretary. I think he's playing this on the optimistic side. I think Speaker Pelosi understands the importance of the debt ceiling, whether it goes alone or whether it's part of a budget deal. I think they're making pretty good progress on that.
Finally, I've just got to ask you if you're concerned at all about what the president tweeted over the weekend about those 4 Democratic congresswomen. So much has been said the last 24 hours. Does that bother you at all, his words on those about those women?
Look, first thing I'll say is it's way outside my lane. The second thing I'll say is, he tweeted it and he has been explaining it in the last 24 hours or so. I've known President Trump over 20 years, and I will simply say this is my personal view. There is not a racist bone in his body. That is my view.
And our thanks again to Director Kudlow for coming on the briefing room. Well, today, finally, here in the briefing room, a look back at 50 years ago today to that historic launch of the Apollo 11 mission that put an American on the moon. Our senior chief transportation correspondent, David Curley, got a closer look at the suit that Neil Armstrong wore on that incredible day.
On a table in a museum lab, possibly the most iconic suit in the world.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Neil Armstrong was on the moon for less than 3 hours, but his suit still carries the dust of that historic walk.
There is moon dust embedded here in this suit.
But this was not the work of an aerospace company. The women's garment company Playtex won the contract to build the Apollo spacesuit. Armstrong's suit, now preserved for us to see up close, something that touched the moon, and so many of us. So the suit now on display here at the Air and Space Museum. You can't get much closer to a piece of history like this. Neil Armstrong got on live television after his moonwalk and thanks the folks who built what he called his mini spacecraft that kept him alive on the moon. And I have to tell you, Devin, to be that close to something as iconic as this was really remarkable, and to see the dust still in it. It's available for anybody who wants to come to the Air and Space Museum here in Washington. Devin?
All right, our thanks to David Curley for that. Thank you for watching us today here in the briefing room. We're here every day, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC News Live, replaying at 5:30 and 6:30. Download the ABC News app. We'll leave you today with a look back on that historic launch 50 years ago today of Apollo 11. We'll see you tomorrow.
Roger, team. Liftoff. Liftoff. Roger, liftoff. And we have liftoff. Now the huge tail is passing the tower. She's rising. She's yawing now to clear the tower. That slight yaw. She's lifting up. We have power clear. We have power clear. We're beginning to feel the first thunderous roll.